Hey guys, we're meeting again for the second time this week as we're looking at and talking about the idea and the concept of the source and purpose of law. Anytime we're talking about law, we get into really different ideas and contrasting problems. And you can see I shifted again for the background and notice this time we've got weapons in the background because so many times weapons are used to enforce law. So my martial arts background showing a little bit with swords on the top, and then this is a shield that a friend of mine gave me, and I just love it. But of course, then it has my Okinawan sai on them for doing different things. But so this idea of law, sources of law. Anytime we start discussing law, we also have to talk about morals. Now, since we're talking about law, we have ding, 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 the Ten Commandments here, and we'll come back to those in just a moment. But when it comes to the Bible and it comes to the discussion about the law, this is where it starts. This is the idea primary in not only in Jewish thought, but in also in the thought of the rest of the Bible. And even Jesus, that we've already read in the Sermon on the Mount, says, "You've heard it said, don't murder. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery," and so on. This is where that comes from. All right, so we'll come back to that in a minute. All right, so talking about the source of law. Source of law. Now, as children, we're taught, and as children, we're things are planted in our minds and in our psyche along the way of things that are wrong and things that are right. Those convictions, those things that we believe that are wrong and right, and so on, become part and parcel of our moral structure. Our morals are the things that we believe are right, and the morals that we believe are things that we believe are wrong. Now, as society gets bigger and there's more people involved and there's more viewpoints involved, the difference between morals and legality becomes quite complicated. In ancient times, when you just had a tribe and you had a matriarch or a patriarch who was in charge, they made the law and everybody in the family obeyed it. But when you get into larger cultural structures, it's really difficult, such as even debates today in our own culture about the LGBTQ issues and abortion, adultery, gender identity issues. All of those things get wrapped up in this moral discussions, religious discussions, and legal discussions. So we want to be able to make sure that we can discern between all three of these ideas and try to figure out how we can sort of make our way along through that. Now, so there's two basic ideas when it comes to the source of morality and the source of law, and that is the source of that and where that source is. The question is this: do we make up our own minds about everything and everything that we hold in our moral structures, or do they come from outside of us? Well, for most of us, the beginning of our moral structure begins with our parents and the things that they tell us are right and wrong. So those ideas are actually coming to us from outside of ourselves. So that means that law has an external source. Now, here's the difficulty with that. That's also the view in the Bible, that God was the source of the law. And we're going to look at that in just a minute in the book of Exodus that you're reading this week in chapter 19 and 20 in the book of Exodus. So we have this idea then of where law comes from. Now, the idea of people making up their own minds about what's right and wrong while not listening to social structures or traditional laws and so on is a very, very modern idea. There are examples of it in the text, but they tend to be hotly and very, very thoroughly excoriated and treated very badly in the Bible because they're viewed as rebellion. Not just that we need to find a way for everybody to be happy with their own moral structures. That's not the view in the Bible at all. The view in the Bible is that there are absolutes and that those absolutes have to be adhered to, or it brings about punishment, thus weapons in legal enforcement and so on. It's about, we don't get paid to be good law-abiding citizens. We're expected to be law-abiding citizens because that's what culture expects from us. That's what society expects from us, and so on. So working then through this idea of where these ideas come from and how we derive the things that we believe are right and wrong and so on. Now, as we get older and as you have gotten older, from being a child and being told what's right and wrong, and becoming an adolescent. Those of you who are beginning to push into your early 20s, you think about things differently. You've experienced things in the world, and you may have decided to change some things about things that you were taught as a child, and so on. And that's part of growing up. Well, we have to come to a point of balance in our own lives and sort of understanding ourselves. But at the same time, we do need to be aware of these other sources. So when we speaking biblically, there's actually a section of the Bible itself that is referred to as the law. The Jewish word is Torah. The law is the first 5 books of the Bible, the books traditionally attributed to being written by Moses, somewhere between 15 to 1300 BC, somewhere in that time period. And this is the source of the 10 Commandments. Now, here's the setting. The people of Israel had been enslaved in Egypt for at least an extended period of time, generations, maybe not 4 centuries, but at least an extended period of time of several generations. They have been delivered by God through an amazing set of circumstances and miracles called the plagues of Egypt, which basically just set out to just destroy Egypt's economy. Everything, military, the whole 9 yards. It is a grim tale that is told in the first part of the book of Exodus, where God delivers judgment against the nation of Egypt to free his people. So the people are finally free. Moses leads them out into the wilderness, and of course, because it's such a large group of people, the text says it's 600,000. Whether or not it's 600,000 people total, or if it's 600,000 men, as the text originally says, and there's additional people, women and children and so on, but that's not really our issue, what we want to fight at today. So this group of people, they begin to have disagreements, they begin to have arguments, they begin to have issues, because anywhere you got more than one person, you got issues. So there needs to be some type of structure. So as Moses leads the people and brings them to a place called Mount Sinai, and there's several places that are traditionally Mount Sinai, out on the Sinai Peninsula, right? So we understand it's this huge area. But as in the scripture, as he brings them to this place, God tells him in Exodus 19, Moses, in 3 days, I'm coming down to speak to the people. I'm coming down to address the people, get them ready. They need to wash their clothes. They need to clean themselves up. They need to make sure they are ready to meet God. Now that in itself might be a scary premise, right? This whole idea of meeting God. And it's a very powerful scene and very powerful movie. I keep hoping that someone's going to do a really good movie version of that, which would be someone like Spielberg or somebody that really has the money to really do this story justice. So this whole idea then of them coming and meeting God. So it says actually down in verse 16 in chapter 19, it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled and were afraid. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Coming out to meet God. Now, it's not just this idea of saying, hi. This is being confronted by the creator of the universe from the biblical perspective. That this is a mind-blowing, awesome, awestruck, not knowing what to say, throwing yourself on your face kind of moment to because of the immensity of this event in people's lives. We talked about fundamental religious experiences. This is a fundamental religious experience, not just for one person, but for an entire nation. Okay, so what comes out of this then? God speaks to the people and says, "Listen, this is the way it's going to be. I'm God, and I'm going to make an agreement with you. I'm going to make an agreement with you that's called a covenant." And the people say, "We will do whatever you tell us, God. We'll do whatever you tell us." So God says, if you'll obey me, if you'll obey my laws, my statutes, my commandments, all those things, if you will obey me, you'll be my special people. You'll be my special possession. You'll be a treasure. You'll be a nation of priests, and all these different wonderful ideas that go along with that. And the people say, we'll do everything that God says. Sounds great. Sounds marvelous. So the people, having met God, having agreed to what God's going to say, Moses marches up onto the mountain and comes back down just a time later with the 10 Commandments. Now, understand, you're reading in the first part of chapter 20, and the first part of chapter 20 is all about the 10 Commandments. The law continues for several chapters after that. There's laws about property. There's laws about getting in fights and hurting people. There's laws about animals, how to take care of your animals. There's laws about property. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's not just the Ten Commandments. Understand that, guys. Okay, the Ten Commandments are important. That they're excruciatingly important, and they are the basis of everything else. So we have to understand that. So if we look at these, understand as a slave nation who has been told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, when to get up, when to go to bed, all those types of things for generations. This is a group of people who need structure. The Ten Commandments provide the structure that they need to establish themselves, not only in a religious sense, but also in a civil sense as well. So the way the laws are broken up here, people to God laws are don't worship any other gods, because there's not any. There's only one. And that's the Creator from the book of Genesis. Don't make any idols. They had just came out of Egypt, and we've all studied enough history to know that the Egyptians set up temples and idols of every kind imaginable, and had altars set up, and they worshipped these quote unquote creations of their own mind. And so God says, no, you can't do that. Don't do that either. There is no graven images of God. You cannot make an image of God. Don't misuse even God's name. That's how important, because the ancient concept of a name is very, very strong. So don't even misuse God's name, and then keep the Sabbath day holy. The Sabbath day is the seventh day, which would be our Saturday. It actually begins Friday night in the evening to Saturday evening. Even today, Jews still observe the Sabbath, many religious Jews. So keeping the Sabbath day holy. That goes back to Genesis chapter 1, right, with the creation, where God rested on the seventh day. Okay, that's where that connection comes in. So then notice the other set then are what I call horizontal rules. They're people-to-people rules. Honor mother and father, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. Now, those sound really familiar. Those sound like laws that we're familiar with in our own culture and in our own society. Those aren't things that lie outside of our experience level. We know you commit murder, you go to jail. We know you commit adultery, you cause all kinds of problems between two families, if not more. Stealing, jail time, right? Lying, depending upon if you're in court or if lying to your family or to your parents, whatever the case may be, lying causes lots and lots of problems. And not coveting is wanting things that are not yours, which of course, if you want something that's not yours, you'll lie about it to get it. If you want something that's not yours, you'll steal it to get it. If you want somebody that's not yours, you'll commit adultery to get it. And all those things point and lead to murder. So understand, all these things are interconnected. Now, so we have the religious basis of the law, then we have the civil basis of the law. So this is set forth for this group of people as a set of relationships and a set of laws and a set of rules and statutes and so on for them to live by, to establish some boundaries amongst the people their boundaries have been totally imposed upon them by their taskmasters as slaves. As slaves, they couldn't make their own rules. Now they've been handed a set of rules and say, hey, look, this is where we begin. This is where we start. Okay. So where did the law come from? It was imposed from without. God gives the law, and the people say, as a whole, as a culture, as a people, as tribes, as families, and so on, we will accept the law and run with it. We'll take it. We'll do it. And they say, we will do everything that God says, and this is what God says. Now, of course, the rest of the Bible is the long, sad story of how they obeyed, how they disobeyed, how they did what they were supposed to do, and how they didn't do what they were supposed to do, all along the way for centuries. So welcome to Humanity 101, right? So when we come then into this discussion about the purpose of law, well, the purpose was to help them live together. The purpose was to keep them in the right place with God, right, vertically, and to keep them in the right place with each other, horizontally, people to people, okay? So it's people to God, people to people, the two basic relationships we have in our lives. So this idea then of them being given rules, right? And there's lots and lots and lots and lots of rules. We understand that. There's legal systems are complicated. Our own legal systems are extraordinarily complicated. Now, but the strength of the law is based in God's authority. That's when it's imposed from without. It's called divine fiat, F-I-A-T, if you want to look that up, divine fiat. In other words, God said it, that settles it. and there is no other argument about it. So the force of law behind not committing murder is not you're going to prison. It is that God is going to judge you and hold you accountable if you commit murder. It's not don't commit adultery because it just creates bad relationships. It's God has said you are to cherish the family rules and the way family works, and you're to behave yourself and work inside those structures because those structures benefit society. So the force of the laws then that are delivered by Moses all come because it comes from God. Okay? Now, as time progresses, and as we move into larger cultures and other world cultures and so on in the Bible and then outside the Bible, after the Bible's composition and so on, we realize there's lots and lots of different ideas about what law really is. And law is not about making us happy, and law is not about paying us money to be good law-abiding citizens, right? Our obedience is expected, even though the force of law today is the force of society. And it can be changed by votes, by legislation, and so on. But we understand that the force of law still today, we still have police, we still have sheriff's departments, a highway patrol, we still have an army, we still have all these types of things that are involved in and invoke in enforcing the law. So although God may not be the focus of the strength behind the law, we still have this very, very strong part of what law and how law is enforced in our lives. Now, so Exodus 19 and 20 is about God giving the law to the Jewish people, to the Hebrew people, and then we could read for the rest of the Bible how that focuses in and out of their lives and how they obey, disobey, so on. And then in the New Testament, we've already looked at it. We've seen how Jesus himself also redefined some of these laws. You've already read it in the Sermon on the Mount. Remember, Jesus said, you've heard it said, don't commit murder. I say to you, don't even be mad for the wrong reason. Don't commit adultery. Jesus says, don't even look at a person with lust in your heart. We've already read that this semester already. So you've already been exposed to some of these reinterpreting ideas. Now, as we come along the way and as society grows, and particularly coming through the Enlightenment in the 16 and 1700s and so on, and we begin to see some rejection of traditional ideas, traditional religious ideas, and so on, we have to find a different source of law. What determines what's wrong and what's right? Now, this is where things really start to get complicated, because if it's just simply what God said, then you can read what God said and you go by that and you don't argue it. You can't argue it. But when we look for other sources of law, this is where a word that you've already heard, a title you've already heard this semester, humanism. I've posted a link to a video alongside this lecture. It's only about 4 minutes long, dealing with what humanism says and how humanism says where law comes from. Law comes from a humanist view, the things that we ought to do and the things that we should do. But the question is this: in humanist, and as you watch the video, I hope you'll be sensitive to the fact that it speaks in generalities. It's very generic, it's very general, and it's like most of us should do this, and we ought to do this, and we should do this. But the problem is that under a humanist idea, if someone disagrees with the law, most stringently enough, there's actually no way to say that what they believe is wrong, because there's no basis for that in humanism. So watch that video and watch it and pay sort of attention to it. It's actually kind of comical in places, but I mean, it's trying to persuade you to a humanist idea, but be aware of the potholes. There's a lot of potholes in that road. It's not to say that the biblical view of God being the source of all of our laws is necessarily the way that we have to live as well. Although, as people of faith, as Christians and Jews and so on, we take God's law in the Bible very, very seriously, and we should do that. Society as itself doesn't necessarily do that, and we see laws that are opposed to biblical ideas. We see laws that are opposed to certain moral standards and so on. So we get in that struggle between what's moral, what's legal, and it's a very, very difficult thing that we have to wrestle with in this society that we're part of today. But that's just the nature of being grown-ups and the nature of existing in a society as diverse as ours is. And sometimes we have to agree to disagree and be able to move on and treat people well and still disagree with the way they do things. So the source of law then, Okay. Now, purpose of law is varied. Is law's sole purpose just is law's purpose just to preserve society, or does it go beyond that? If it's just to preserve society, then there are laws that should take off the books because they just get in our way. You know, we want to drive fast, so therefore the speed limits just get in our way. They just shouldn't be there. We should just do away with the speed limits and be able to drive the way we want to. Well, you see that then you start getting into that the condition between law and freedom, and that's an even bigger one here in America because people want to be free to do whatever they want to do. I mean, even in these days when people are being told, please don't be around people, keep your distance, don't be out shopping if you don't need to shop, don't go places where you don't need to go, and so on. And people are out doing it anyway because they think it's imposing on their freedom. Legal and freedom sometimes clash. Legal and laws sometimes limit our freedoms for the sake of preserving society. So it really is sort of an apt discussion for where we're at in these days. So the purpose of the law then, is it just to preserve society? Well, it does preserve society, but it also limits freedom in some cases. It's also to protect society from people who don't want to adhere to the legal system. So therefore, we have a system of punishing people who cannot abide by our culture's and our society's laws. So purpose of law is to protect society from people who don't want to live by the rules. It's also to keep society and preserve our society and our culture as we go forward and help it to flourish. So we see lots of different things now. But there's a step that goes beyond that. And this is in the passage that you're reading in the book of Galatians in chapter 3. And I used to have students read more of the book of Galatians because the argument is actually kind of long. But I wanted to keep it focused on a very short passage of scripture, so you're only reading part of chapter 3. But in that passage that you're reading, the Apostle Paul, who was trained as a Pharisee, was one of this group of people that sort of gave Jesus a hard time and so on. You could read about Paul in lots and lots of places if you want to. I don't want to get too involved just following in Paul, but Paul talks about in chapter 3 the way that law works and what its purpose was in the life of the people in the Bible. Okay? He talks about its purpose and he talks about the way that it functions. He says that law was a guardian, kind of like someone that, when in ancient times, particularly in Roman society, when children were born, children were entrusted to servants in the house. And those servants were put in charge of watching after that child, making sure that child was educated, making sure that child was fed, and so on, until they got to be a certain age. When they got to be a certain age, they became an adult. This is where the Hebrew idea of the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah comes from. When you turn 12 or 13 years old, you become an adult. In Roman times, it was the toga virilis was the ritual that a child was no longer a child, that we were declared an adult, and so on. So that people were entrusted to these sort of guardians and these trustees to watch over them and help them learn and help them get to where they could be an adult and function as an adult. So Paul talks about that in the book of Galatians in some really interesting ways. And so if we ourselves adopted that ideology, Paul's ideology in Galatians, about the way we think of our own laws, we would understand that perhaps the purpose of law is to turn us into a certain kind of person who can then function inside the law, but yet thrive and be free and have the right kind of freedoms and treat people the right way and so on inside that system, but without the law having to continually be hung over our head. In other words, it's almost the idea of, yes, we all want to drive fast. And we all want to drive as fast as we want to, whenever we want to, however we want to. But maybe we reach a point of saying, that's not the best way of doing things, so therefore I'm not going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what's best for everybody around me. Maybe it's a maturity idea that Paul's talking about. And maybe that is part of the Old Testament story. It is a maturity level thing of the people and how they interacted with God and God's law. So as you're reading them this week and as you're looking at these passages, think about how law has affected you. Right now we have laws and declarations and proclamations and statements being made by government which have an effect on our everyday life. Grocery stores are open. It's amazing. Grocery stores, drugstores are open, and you can go get the things that you need. But Target is, and a lot of places that just sell clothing, Ross, TJ Maxx, all those places here in Monroe, they're closed because the government said you have got to close to prevent the spread of this virus, to prevent people from congregating. Even the little playground here in our neighborhood, the playground equipment has been roped off because they want kids outside playing, but they don't want them playing and touching surfaces and so on where they might can pick up this virus. So these proclamations, although they're not laws, they're recommendations, suggestions, and so on, but they have a little bit more teeth than that. They can be enforced legally. So understand that maybe the situation we're in right now and our attitude toward these proclamations and our attitude toward what's going on right now may actually sort of bite into and sort of put us in a position where we have to understand, where does law come from? If it's imposed from outside, then there's also an authority that can impose that on us, be it the government, be it God. Either way, the function is the same. If it's purely humanistic and it's just, oh, well, we should do, we could do, the generalities that you'll see in that other video, that may not work in some cases. Because if somebody decides, well, I believe in the humanist way, but I'm going to determine my own right and wrong, that's the way serial killers think. Okay, the psychopathic people think that they make their own standards of right and wrong, and the humanist idea, you have to be really careful because it can end up there. So think about then, and as you're answering the couple of questions with regard to this reading assignment, think about how law works in your own life and what you think about it, because laws are made. Laws are changed. Laws pass into, sort of where they've become antique and they have to be sort of set aside as society outgrows them, and then new ones have to be created. Law is a part of your life every single day. So think about its source. Think about its purpose. Think about what the Bible says about it coming from God, or in our society when it comes from the government, or if it's something that is really there to sort of teach us the lessons as children, and then as we get a little bit older we learn better, or maybe if it's there all the time, act as a guardian. Okay, so I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're keeping yourself healthy and that you're getting fresh air, you're getting out in the yard. If you don't go anywhere, okay, so locked up on me there for a minute. I got really scared. Okay, so I hope you're getting some fresh air, spending some time with family, spending some time studying. Yes, I mean, some of you are working. I know, and I get emails from folks who are working. I know you got to do what you got to do to get by. So if there's anything I can do to help you, I know some of you are having some technology issues getting assignments and things, I'll work with you on those. I'm trying to make sure we keep the door open for everybody to do everything that they can to get everything turned in. So after this week, we only have about 3 more weeks. So you guys hang in there. Keep up the good work. Everybody's responding really well. A lot of you have done some great things to try and bring your grades up from midterm and so on. So we'll just continue along the way. And I hope you've enjoyed these couple of lectures. I try to keep them shorter. And we will see you all next week in next week's videos. God bless. Take care. And I will talk with you soon.